proceeding with the session, I would like to tell you briefly about RFMLR and RFMLR TechTalk. RFMLR is a biannual, double-blind, peer-reviewed law journal published by RG Anywhere. The journal is indexed on SEC Online and has consistently been ranked amongst the top 10 most accessed law school journals by SEC Online. The editorial board also collaborates with legal experts and undertakes various academic initiatives to promote study and research in the field of business and commercial laws. RFMLR Tech Talk is one such initiative. Aim to create and promote course around FinLaw. The importance of fintech law has only been reinforced by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has necessitated the growth of digital services at an unprecedented rate. Keeping in view the significance of fintech laws, RFMLR is also inviting blog submissions on digital commerce and fintech law on a rolling basis. Please check out our call for blogs on digital commerce and fintech. The link of the same has been shared in the chat box. In this initiative, SEC Online and EBC have joined us as our knowledge partners. Yesterday, we had an insightful session on open banking and open finance with Ms. Akshata Namjoshi, who is a lead in fintech, blockchain, and emerging tech at Kun Legal Consultants, UAE. Today, we are honored to have with us Mr. Ratul Roshan, associate at Ikigai Law. He is an expert in blockchain technology, fintech, and tech policy. He has pursued his LL.B from Delhi University. Mr. Roshan advises cloud service providers, online content platforms, financial technology companies, and e-commerce platforms on laws governing personal and non-personal data, privacy, content regulation, intermediary liability, and cloud infrastructure ownership, amongst other laws. Sir, I extend you a warm welcome on behalf of RFMLR editorial board. Before we proceed with the session, thank you, sir. Before we proceed with the session, I'll briefly explain the structure of the session. Sir will be dealing with the topic of smart contracts and their enforceability. In the first hour, we will reserve last half an hour exclusively for questions and answers, during which we will unmute the participants who will raise their hands to allow them to ask questions from sir and interact with him. However, if you have any questions in the first hour, please feel free to send them to the handle designated as Kalin Bharadwaj Q&A through the Q&A panel. We will try to take some of those questions in between the session. Questions directed to any other panelist or chat or attendee will not be considered. You can So now I think we can proceed with the discussion. I'll give the floor to you so that you can discuss smart contracts and their enforceability.
Right. Thanks so much, Soumya. That was a lovely introduction, and probably I'm only partly qualified to receive that much of a great introduction here today. But I just wanted to ask if it was possible for us to have an interactive session probably throughout. Probably Tamil could help us, or you could unmute the participants right now, because I don't want this to become a drab and dreary session where I speak and probably people zone out sometime in the middle. So will that be possible?
Sure, sir. As you wish. We will unmute the participants who raise their hands.
Before I begin with anything, I'd just like to know if there are any participants here who are either not lawyers or not tech-related people, probably people from the policy space, people from the arts, people from marketing, design. Is there a single participant who is not either from law or tech? You can just drop in your comments. I'll be able to see them. I'll know, and that will determine where I start from. Okay. So is blockchain. brief, probably is because contracts work as well. Is there anyone who would like me to start from there? Okay, I'm not.
I think you can start from
Safer
the
side,
basics.
because I know that there are some participants today here who probably could benefit from such an introduction. Let's just understand the technology conceptually, right? I won't go into the techniques of it. Let's just understand what is the problem.
Right.
Great. Sure. So just, let's try to understand the conceptual framework of what it is and what thanks, I'm not trying to do it. If any of you have played Jenga or have seen how Jenga is played, you understand, you pretty much already to some extent understand blockchain, right? The basic premise is that you build a method of storage that is incorruptible, that is immutable, right? In a lot of industries, it becomes very important because it is where the buck stops, right? I mean, if you can trace back the origin or the provenance of a particular product or a particular service to its source accurately, then that solves a lot of problems later on. Now, it would be wrong for me to say that blockchain technology is a new innovation. It really isn't. Even some of you might say it came in around 2010, 2012, but that would not be very accurate. The building blocks of blockchain have existed probably since the 1980s. It is only that as a new technology, it came in and it was popularized as a new technology built upon cryptocurrencies and few cryptocurrencies from 2010, 2012 onwards, right? So essentially, what is a blockchain? It is a chain of blocks. Every block has information, and these blocks are connected in such a way that if you change the content of any one block, all of the blocks after that will also have to change. The reason for that is the technology of hashing that is used. Every block is ascribed a particular hash. For those of you who don't understand how hashing works, the simplest way to understand it is that it is a unique identity card. It is depending on the contents of the block. So if the block has the information, Ratul Roshan will take this talk at 4 p.m. today, then a particular hash will be created, as opposed to which if the sentence is Ratul Roshan webinar at 4 p.m. today and Soumya Tiwari will be moderating it, that additional information changes the hash completely. Now, the beauty with blockchain is that with every subsequent block, it relies on the hash of the previous block to create its own. If there is a change in the hash of any one block, the hashes of the blocks that come after go haywire automatically. It becomes very easy to trace this particular record has been tampered with, and that is where a lot of the benefits of blockchain come through. Then again, of course, there's the idea that blockchain is transparent, it is distributed, it is trustless. I will touch upon these very briefly right now before I go forward. It is transparent because you can design a blockchain to be such that people around the world can just open and access and see what's stored on the blockchain, right? Now, this is I would just like to clarify here. This would be an example of a public blockchain. And not a private blockchain. So you can design it as the way you want to design it, right? You can have blockchains that are not visible to everyone. You can have blockchains, the contents of which are visible only to people. Those are private blockchains, but this is like completely a design choice. You say they are architecturally distributed. What that essentially means is that this information is stored in one central location. It is stored across the computers or the systems of the participants on that blockchain. So if we have a blockchain for RGNUL, me including all of the participants here today, we run a blockchain and we say, all right, let's make this a private blockchain. Let's make this a private blockchain and let's people with this that's a question being private. And the question being distributed is that the same record, the identity record is stored on the server, which means that if the safe as long as there is even one server or even one computer that has that record. So that's the bit about blockchain and how it works and the benefits that it brings. But intricacies, nuts and bolts. Happy to take them online and answer any specific. Now coming on to what exactly bit contract a piece of code. Now, blockchain, as I said, is information stored, and there's a capability that you execute a piece of code on any given blockchain. That drawing from information on a blockchain is able to select it, right? I'll just give you an example that makes it easier. We have a blockchain, it's a private distributed blockchain system. Everyone develops the lists and the attendees, the participants are all members there. And the information that is stored is currently this blockchain has 20 members. I can probably execute a code on the blockchain that says as soon as there are 25 members, add another panelist, or as soon as there are 30 members, let's say what give every member $1, something to that extent, right? So a smart contract is essentially a piece of code that will run within that blockchain, and it has to be in an if X then Y syntax, which essentially means that if this condition is met, then do this. Now, of course, the Ys can be 5 Ys. I can say if there are 30 members tomorrow, do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And there can be multiple X's as well. It can be if this happens, plus this happens, plus this happens, then do A, B, C, D, or just A. Yes, guys, please go ahead and post your questions. I would really like this to be an interactive session because it's really, it is quite possible for people to just not pick up in some places and then lose kind of interest in the webinar, which is the last thing that we want for it to happen. So yeah, that's a smart contract, right? But and it's a fairly nifty thing, right? I mean, if you think about it, it self executes. It's pretty safe because the information that you post on the blockchain, if you're sure that that information is accurate, and you post a smart contract code that will run accordingly, you can be pretty sure that this code will execute when X is met, Y will happen. And that takes a lot of burden off of you, right? Because you don't have to go ahead and make sure that probably some sort of money is coming to you or any other thing that you want to execute is happening with manual intervention. You can totally take manual intervention out. Which brings me to my third point before I dive into the prospect of enforceability. Why do we need smart contracts? Like, why are lawyers going crazy about it? Why are probably people in the business world going crazy about it? What is it about a smart contract that didn't exist earlier? I mean, anyone of you who has any experience in stocks, you see that there are limit orders, right? So you say, as soon as this stock hits $50, I want to buy it. As soon as the stock hits $60, I want to sell it. So that's pretty much a smart contract. But then why is it that we're going so gung-ho over smart contracts? The idea essentially is, or the larger vision is that contracts today there is a lot of subjectivity, and frankly, in the most brusque sense, there is a lot of reliance on the goodwill and the good ethic of the other party to uphold its end of the bargain. Now, anyone who is a proponent or an evangelist of blockchain will say that we need blockchain because we want to remove this element of subjectivity. We want to make the code the law. We want to create codes in such a manner, and we want to store them so securely that no one tomorrow has the ability to say that I understand that I should have done this, but I don't want to, and so I will not, right? We want to bring down dispute costs. We want to bring down execution costs. These are all of the reasons people in the business world, as well as people in the legal world, are really interested in this particular technology. I'm going to pause for just 15 seconds to see if anyone has any questions, and then we can.
So we do not have any questions, but I have a doubt. As you said that the purpose of or the one of the benefits of a smart contract is that it removes the element of subjectivity or interpretation. So, for example, the code is set in a way that if X does not happen, Y happens. Like if the goods are not delivered, so you have to Y. This amount of money has to be paid as penalty or something, right? So if
Sure.
X does not happen because of some reason, say force majeure, like pandemic. So in here, if if it is automatic and damages have to be paid, and it is all happening through blockchain automatically, so it leaves out a scope of interpretation. Like there was a genuine reason why the goods were not delivered, why X did not happen. So how are these circumstances are addressed in a smart contract?
Correct, correct. No, that's a lovely question. As a matter of fact, what you have actually question's gone somewhere, but I'll just come back to that and
Yes,
probably
I'll
take
read
up
that
what
question in a
Soumya
bit.
has brought up first. Soumya, what you've touched upon is probably one of the biggest debates that happen around smart contracts and blockchain. Problem at all. One of and one of the biggest questions around blockchain and smart contracts generally, right? I mean, it's automatic, it's untamperable. Once you can't change it, so happen. I mean, that inherent in traditional contracts. Question. And a lot of, as an answer to that, a lot of innovation has happened on blockchain generally. There is the ability to modify, to change, and to correct the execution of smart contracts. So like that's you should range from possible contracts to smart contract can be a possible contract, which essentially says if something happens and such, and both parties agree that we don't want to go ahead with the execution of this contract. You can probably have a possible contract. That's one. And I'm just listing there are many other options. I'm just listing probably the top 4 or 5 that I've come across. Uh, there are patches. Patches are essentially okay. What if you were to write a piece of code and you thought that it would execute in X way, right? Now, but when it comes to execute, realize that it's not executing in a particular way. It's not doing only Y, it's doing Y, Z, and X. Then what do you do, right? In that case, you can have administrative control. Problem in this market, and we want through something that can be designed in multiple. In this market, the variables, what is the execution, or we select a variety of variables. That's also called, it has a particular term for it. Just give me a minute. They're called transaction sets. I also had notes. I'm very sorry I'm referring to those. They're referred to as transaction sets, right? So probably the smart contract can say if X happens, then do this, or do either of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and both the parties together can come and say, all right, one of these sets is an active set and the others are all inactive sets, in which case what happens, they have the liberty to choose which of these sets will execute. So if Soumya sends Ratul his goods by Monday, Ratul will send Soumya $20. Great, that happens. I mean, no problem there, right? But what happens if Soumya sends Ratul his goods on Tuesday? That will be a separate set. And Soumya and Ratul together can choose to activate or deactivate any given set at any particular point of time. That's another. The third are chameleon hashes, which essentially is that, as I touched upon earlier, the identity of any given block on the chain is its hash. Now, I can probably go back to the blockchain. I can go to the earlier, to an earlier stage or an earlier transaction within the blockchain. And I can just try to change that smart contract code, right? I mean, what's stopping me? The only thing that's stopping me is that if I change that code, then that particular block in the blockchain falls, and every subsequent block in that blockchain falls, and therefore that blockchain then becomes somewhat redundant. So we don't want that to happen. What can you do for that? You can use chameleon hashes, which essentially means that the hash will remain the same, while the content inside the block can be changed. So there are a lot of innovations that are coming through to accommodate exactly this problem. That what immutability is a great thing because it leaves a trace. Immutability is a bad thing because it's not flexible, and therefore it is not amenable to how industry actually works. So those are one of like there are multiple solutions. There are actually blockchain coding languages that allow you to have mutable variables. So if you click up Scilla, which is SCILL or ST, these are coding languages on for blockchain technology that allow you to have mutable variables. In which case, you can include or you can account for such variables within any business predicament. So I hope that answers your question. I did see that there were several other questions that popped up on my screen. So if you'd like me to take any
Yes,
one of
yes.
those before I start.
Yes. I'll read the question. It was by Muskan Agrawal. it says when you say that there are if and then clauses in smart contracts, has there any mechanism involved to include subjective clauses in such contracts? Or smart contracts are suited only for some types of contract which are not subject to such subjectivity or flexibility.
And is a really important and a really good question. I mean, kudos there. You guys are actually paying attention. That's great. I love it. Right. So you're absolutely so what kind only include those exit probably execute in that instance. I say, let's say, so much you can't smart contract not be associated with my identity. Don't state my bank identity. I'll have to release some information on either side to ensure there's a connection between smart contract and my bank account. So that when the smart contract fires, $20 from my bank account is transferred. So these indications need to be made. So for that, of course, like one solution is that you use cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are pretty like a store of how much cryptocurrencies you own in your given warm or cold or hot wallet can be stored on a blockchain. But this may not always be the case, right? There will be certain subjective elements as well, which are not executionary at all. For instance, what happens to the jurisdiction clause? It's not an executionary clause. It's just a clause that lays down what is to be, where will this dispute be resolved, right? What is the jurisdiction? Now, and that is what the larger portion of this webinar is also going to be. We need to marry, in order to accommodate this problem, we need to marry smart contracts with something that we know as Ricardian contracts, right? Smart contracts in and of themselves are unlikely to be for the longest time able to accommodate contracts or replace traditional contracts. The only way to do it is to marry it with certain other technologies that allow for the accommodation of these subjective clauses. So to answer your question before that, I'll just touch upon what a Ricardian contract is. Fairly simple. The human language contract, which then gets translated into a computer contract as well. So if you were to go to openbazaar.io, it's somewhat like an Amazon except on blockchain. You are made to sign a form, and it's in common text, right? I, Ratul Roshan. There's a blank. You say Ratul Roshan will do. Again, there's a blank. I will transfer so and so, or receive so and so, or I will transfer cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin, so on and so forth. I'll do whatever I'll do if this were to happen, right? Now these recording contracts accommodate smart contracts, sure, but there is also the possibility of having non-executionary clauses in a recording contract. So in that recording contract, which is essentially now, there are some clauses which are in that if X then Y syntax, while there are other clauses as well which are not in the if X then Y syntax. Therefore, you can include your subjective clauses there, so that whenever you were to take this document to court, you'll say, hey, hi, these were the executionary bits that we relied on, and these were the non-executionary subjective bits that we relied on. This is a non-compete clause. This is the jurisdiction clause. This is the penalties. Of course, you can get done through the smart contract itself, the code itself. But the code then has recourse not only to the pieces of code that you have relied on. It also has recourse to the non-executionary clauses within that document. So you can't accommodate subjective clauses within a smart contract, sure, but you can definitely do it if you marry that technology with certain other technologies. And for us, we believe, like from our research, what we believe is that the best way to go ahead and do that is to have recording contracts which can accommodate subjective clauses as well. But like that was my answer, but I'm just going to leave with one last afterthought. It may also be the case for at least probably a couple of decades that you will see smart contracts only being used for executionary purposes. You will probably still be relying on traditional contracts for all subjective clauses between two parties. So I hope, Muskan, that answers your. Soumya, any other question that's come up?
Right. This one question. We'll unmute.
Right.
He can.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure. There's a lot of disturbance. Somewhere there's a lot.
Yeah. We can mute him again. Okay. There's one question in the chat box. I'll just.
Sure, sure, sure.
Uh, the question is, Cambrian hashes developed by Accenture change the very basic feature of blockchains, immutability, and in essence becomes a traditional database. To edit a can have consent algorithm happens in case of
Soumya,
private
I'm
blockchains like Hyperledger. Yeah, yeah. Yes, sir.
Soumya, I'm losing you. If you could just probably turn off your video and repeat that question once. I lost you in the middle. I couldn't get a
Sure,
majority of that
sure,
question.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Uh, this comment is by Muskan Agrawal. She says, Camelian hashes developed by Accenture change the very basic nature of blockchains, that is immutability, and in essence becomes a traditional database. To edit the smart contracts, we can have a solution like a change in consensus algorithm, like which happens in cases of private blockchains like Hyperledger and R3 Corda. So it's a comment basically you can elaborate on.
Sure. Uh, Again, a couple of places where I'll disagree with you, Muskan. One is that I don't believe that, of course, like you are able to change the contents of a blockchain, sure. But another feature of chameleon hashes also is that it will leave a scar, which essentially means that it will be fairly identifiable on the blockchain that the contents of this particular blockchain have been changed, and there is also it is also possible to see what the earlier transaction was. So that traceability, that immutability still stays. The only additional value add that a chameleon hash will bring is that it will allow you to change any wrong piece of code or accommodate any new variables. That's about it. But in terms of storage, in terms of immutability, that is maintained. Also, if I were to just comment otherwise, with traditional databases, there are a lot of other things that blockchain brings that traditional databases cannot. Right? Traditional databases are usually centralized. So if you lose a particular record, you're gone. You're done for. You don't have another record of it. You can have multiple copies here and there, but they don't then automate in real time, which is something that needs to be done manually, which is another headache, which is another friction. It's another cost for companies. So that's another thing. And just generally in terms of visibility, right? The idea of blockchain is that it should, to the extent possible, be a publicly visible or at least a transparent ledger that is viewable by as many people as possible. With traditional databases, this usually does not happen. In terms of what you said, that there are alternate solutions, yes. Uh, if you say we can have a change in consensus mechanisms are used to commit information to a blockchain. And of course, your consensus mechanism can have administrative controls, which is something that we touched upon earlier as well. Your consensus mechanism can say that if there are 20 members on the blockchain and 15 say, I want to change this particular record, then definitely it's actually called private chain rewriting. There's a term for it. The only problem with private chain rewriting is that you have absolutely no trace of what was on the blockchain earlier, right? Because ultimately, what do you need to change any given entry on a blockchain? You need to have more than 51% or whatever your internal rules are. I'm just taking this as an example. If you have more than 51% consensus, you will be able to change any given entry on that blockchain. The problem is if this record were to go to court tomorrow and the court were to record, these 20 members will come together. They'll come out and say, hey, hi, this is our record. Except that's not really the original record, is it? They've changed it once. And there is no scar, there is no trace. There is no way to see what was the initial content on that block, which becomes a problem. So I think chameleon hashes to that extent are a good innovation. If you were to say consensus mechanism, sure. I mean, administrative controls, private chain rewriting is all about how you play with consensus mechanisms to make sure that these changes are accounted for. So I see that there was one more question, but what I'll just do is I'll make a bit of a headway on enforceability of smart contracts, and then I'll take that question. right? I hope that's fine. So let's just talk about what problems occur with smart contracts, and let's just think about it in terms of an example again. Soumya and we are 2 out of, let's say, 20 members on a blockchain. We executed a smart contract code and that code misfired. Now, that code misfired in such a way that I got my shoes, and on top of that, I got 2 of Soumya's Bitcoin. So I'm filthy rich at this point. Soumya wants to take me to court. All right, thanks, Muskan. No problem, no problem. Soumya wants to take me to court, except she doesn't know if a court would really be willing to enforce legally a piece of code, right? Court will simply say, hey, this is something that you two did internally. It's not really a contract, it's a piece of code. I mean, there is absolutely nothing to show what happened before or what happened after you executed this piece of code. And frankly, pieces of code can be executed only they are parts of larger contracts. I mean, this is supposed to be executed like this. We are agreeing upon this. You have your recitals, you have all other, you have your offer acceptance, consideration, legal object, all of those things. So what does then Soumya need to do to ensure that if something were to misfire tomorrow, she is able to drag Ratul to court? You don't create a new system. You don't create new laws. You essentially just try to make sure that you architect your smart contract in such a way that it meets the tenets of a traditional contract. That's about it, right? And there are multiple ways of doing this. But essentially, like, what are the basics of a contract, or a traditional contract? I'm saying you need to have your offer, you need to have your acceptance, you need to have a consideration, you need to be competent, and you need to have a legal object. There are, of course, a number of things here and there as well, but we're not going into the nuts and bolts. We're talking from an eagle side perspective. These are the things that you need, right? So for Soumya to be able to take me to court, she needs to first say that, all right, Ratul had made me an offer, and this was the consideration that we had agreed upon. Now, a smart contract code really will not accommodate for that. The solution that we were able to come up with, and we were actually working with a policy think tank, with an international policy think tank. That report will probably be out soon, and we'll be happy to float it to you guys. The solution that we thought was most viable was marrying against smart contracts with Ricardian contracts. Ultimately, Ricardian contracts are contracts which can accommodate the best parts of smart contracts and the best parts of traditional contracts. So that Ricardian contract will have clauses to the effect that on such and so date, these two parties came together and this is what they want to do. You have your recitals, which again become non-executionary clauses within the Ricardian contract. And there will be other clauses as well, right? That this is what they've agreed upon. This is what Soumya will do. This is what Ratul will do. These are the dates. This is the liability. These are the penalties. All of it will be laid down there. Soumya will now essentially have to just prove that this Ricardian contract, which embodies within it the smart contract code, meets the tenets of a regular contract. So she'll say, all right, I created this document, which is a Ricardian contract, and I floated it to Ratul on the blockchain, right? I sent it to Ratul on the blockchain. Now that constitutes an offer. Ratul went ahead. Ratul could have probably read it. Ratul could have read it and disposed of it and said, no, I don't want to do this. Or Ratul could have signed it with his private key, right? If I have a DSC, if I have a digital signature certificate, I'll say, all right, I want to be part of this contract. I want to execute it with Soumya. I will probably then sign it with my private key. That becomes an acceptance on my behalf, right? In terms of considerations, probably Soumya has a wallet, Ratul has a wallet. Soumya says, and this is written within the Ricardian contract, that as part of this contract, Ratul would have to transfer, let's say, 1 Bitcoin in as advance by such and so date. Ratul goes ahead and he does that. So that's also part of the offer, but it's also part of the consideration. And the consideration, of course, is laid out in the contract itself. So all of the terms are laid out in the Ricardian contract. Whatever bits of the Ricardian contract that can be executed will be embodied in the smart contract code, which is now part of that Ricardian contract. The other subjective bits that Muskan was talking about remain subjective bits. As clauses, they remain as they would in traditional clauses, except now this becomes somewhat of a better version, that a traditional contract which is entirely manual and can be presented before a court. So the court will say, all right, Soumya, how did you make your offer? Soumya would say, I sent over the blockchain, I sent this Ricardian contract to Ratul. That was my offer. Ratul signed it with his private key. That became his acceptance. He also, by signing with his private key, he also agreed to the consideration. And as part of the consideration, I wanted 1 Bitcoin in advance, and I got that 1 Bitcoin in advance. So probably we did have a valid contract. Both of us are competent to enter into a contract. that's established, and what we're doing is not illegal, so it's a legal object. So that's how these things happen, right? I mean, that's essentially the entire conversation around how do you ensure that a smart contract becomes enforceable in front of a court. Now, this bit is fairly simple. This bit is really simple. The complications arise when courts are unable to understand what exactly a piece of code was supposed to do, right? Or even lawyers are unable to understand what exactly a piece of code was supposed to do. Because if you remember, this Ricardian contract had within itself pieces of code of the smart contract as well. And me being a lawyer, Soumya being a lawyer, we just looked at the piece of code and we said, "Ha, theek hi lag raha hai. I mean, this is how it should execute. We don't know. Probably it executes in another way." But and by the way, I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine a while back, and he said whenever you start coding, the chances of an error are close to 150%. So it is a lot more likely that you will make an error with your piece of code than for it to be absolutely accurate. Now, how do you account for this when you go to a court? Of course, you can say you could have paused it. Sure, there could have been mutable variables, but both of us were unable to do that. We were unable to foresee that this problem would arise, and now it has arisen. Ratul is unwilling to help Soumya. Soumya takes Ratul to court, and it's in front of a judge. The judge says, "All right, now I've established that this was a contract." Sure. But what do we do about this piece of code, right? Because Ratul doesn't know how it works. Soumya doesn't know how it works. I definitely don't know how it works. It is there that we have suggested the incorporation of certain other infrastructural elements within this entire ecosystem, right? I mean, courts will also have to evolve to some extent. Lawyers will have to evolve to some extent. Engineers will have to be brought in to some extent. That's the difficult solution. The easier solution is, of course, to have programming languages which, although written in human readable text, are able to execute themselves in like as pieces of code. And therefore, when Ratul writes that this is what will happen, or Soumya writes this, I will send a pair of shoes return for $20. That is exactly how it executes in terms of code as well. So those are some of the solutions that are coming up. Those are some of the ideas that are coming up, and there are, again, I spoke of Skilla. I think Askimos is another. It's a resource pool actually, which allows you to translate regular written contracts and regular pieces of code into code that will execute on blockchain as well. So a lot of this is just dependent on the development of the ecosystem in itself. So yeah, I think I'll pause here again for about 2-3 minutes to answer any questions that I may have had. Soumya, if you could just help me with that.
Sure. We can unmute Jubal Stefan. I think he has a question.
Sure, sure.
I'll read
Hello.
out his.
Sure, sure. Please go ahead.
Take a second.
Okay, home. Yeah.
Yes, please introduce yourself and
Very faintly.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So my question was, does it become a problem when a smart contract that is void in law gets self-executed, but then the court cannot reverse the transaction, like de facto cannot reverse the transaction because it's already out of their hands?
Okay, so you're saying then what is the solution to that, right? I mean, that's probably your question, right?
Yeah, and especially when it's a cross-border issue and the court, like, nobody can do anything in immediate scenario. Like,
Right,
if it,
right. So
yeah.
I would probably just want one other clarification from you. When you say it's void, is there any particular predicament that you're envisaging in which case it becomes void? Because see, if it's a void contract, then sure, a court cannot like, there are other solutions which I will touch upon as part of my answer. But I do agree with you. The court will not be able to do much. So if there is any particular predicament or any particular situation that you have in mind, in which context you're asking me this question, I'll probably be able to give you a more pointed answer.
Yeah, okay. I was muted for a while. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was thinking of a case of fraud or of, let's say, a minor being forced into a contract or something of the sort where it cannot be envisaged in the terms of the contract. So you can't just have a logical filter to prevent it from happening. But then you realize when you take a step back, you realize that indeed there has been some big legal problem with the contract. In that case,
Mhm.
how do we resolve this issue with smart contracts?
Got it. Got it. All right. Fair. So we're talking about fraud. We're talking about minors being forced into a contract. In which case, the court will say, all right, this contract is void, and whatever money has been transferred from party A to party B, both of whom are in different countries, should not have happened. Right. How do we solve for that? Great question. Two prongs of solutions here, and both of these are primarily technological. Right. One is that you have. Can everyone please mute themselves? There's a bit of a better. Thanks. So one is that you have precautionary measures. You have preemptive measures to make sure that such sorts of problems do not arise. So especially when we're talking about minors entering into contracts, uh, any form of business transaction going forward is most likely to have very secure form of signature or authentication or verification, right? To my mind, the example that I can come up with from today's context is having a digital signature certificate, which is given to you by a government authority after you've gone through an entire a fairly elaborate process. So going ahead tomorrow, if Mahindra and I don't know, Cisco were to enter into a contract, this contract will not be executed simply by an e-signature, which is like your name at the bottom of a mail, right? You will have to use strong and proper and formalized measures of authenticating these songs. And those strong authentication measures will act as a preemptive, as like a will act to preempt any such situation. So you can think about digital signature certificates. You can think about uh, asymmetrical encryption that is which gives you a private key that you can use. And these certificates, these keys are not given to minors. I mean, that's one of the safeguards that you have. But this will probably not be the best way to take things forward, because there is still a larger chunk of transactions that will not get covered by this, because there could still be a 13-year-old person in India and like a 28-year-old person in Germany, and they could execute a contract. And now the 13-year-old, probably through guardian, takes that 28-year-old to court, and the court realizes that, all right, this is a void contract. Now what do we do? The answer again will be technological. So if and this is a specific example because like otherwise the universe is too huge. Think about centrally backed digital currencies, right? Think about CBDC. So if the transaction essentially was that uh, 2 lakh rupees would be transferred from person A's account to person B's account, but that transaction has happened through CBDCs, which themselves are programmable, then it is very easy for the court to direct the RBI to bring that money back, because CBDCs by their very nature are programmable currency, which the holder of that currency does not at all points have complete control over. The central banks of countries can come together to make sure that that transaction is reversed. That is the second solution that I can think of in this particular context. The third, of course, is having decentralized dispute resolution as well. And another example that I can think of here again is of Open Bazaar, right? They are very similar. Like they think about exactly these problems. That what if I were to send a piece of code to Soumya in return for money? Soumya sent me the money. I haven't sent her the piece of code. Now what happens? In that case, a centralized, like a third party within OpenIO, within Open Bazaar, is chosen to mediate the problem between these two, and that party has the administrative control to reverse the transaction, to reverse the transfer of money from Soumya's account to Ratul's account. Uh, and another technological solution that's used to enable to like facilitate and execute this is having escrows. So if Soumya sends Ratul that money, and that money hasn't reached my account yet, it's in an escrow right now, and Soumya raises a dispute, and the third party dispute resolution professional comes forward and he says, all right, this is what I believe has happened, and I think Soumya should get her money back. That money is still in an escrow. Ratul hasn't been able to withdraw it. So he's able to transfer that money back into Soumya's account. So all of these technological safeguards will uh, will really help courts also find their feet will help not only prevent but also rectify any misfiring of smart contracts or uh, any contracts which have been executed by ill will or contracts that are otherwise void, right? But of course, I completely agree with your point. Like a court cannot really, like short of directing the police to go and get probably seize some assets here or there, which is not the kind of solution that we are looking for, because we're trying to move to a more automated disputes resolution mechanism as well. The courts will be fairly powerless if these other technological measures are not put in place. So yeah, that's I'll end my answer there.
Thank you, sir. Jyot, can we take one more questions, or shall we proceed? Would you like to continue?
We can actually take one more question. I'll tell you why. Because smart contract enforceability as a concept is if I were to go into the nuances now, then it would become an unending sort of a conversation. I'd much rather want the latter half of this discussion to be completely based on questions and answers, because I'm pretty sure there are questions even from the conceptual fundamentals of how blockchain and smart contracts and recurrent contracts generally work. So I think let's limit ourselves to that discussion today. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just take one more question. Then Jyot has a question. You can unmute Jyot.
Sure.
Hi. So my concern is regarding the fact that there's a lot of contracts are designed to be more objective than humans, right? And that the implementation of a smart contract will be rigid in that code implemented in a successful manner. But another coders agree that even code has an intent, even code is subjective, right? So in that regard, wouldn't you agree? Because it is automated, right? It removes the human element which is present in a lot of contractual. I understand this is more philosophical in nature, but essentially a lot of the majority argument on smart contracts is that they are more objective. So I mean, wouldn't essentially be a disincentive for some people to indulge in using instruments like smart contracts?
If I could just paraphrase your question, is your question that if it's more objective, then it's more rigid, and therefore it's not suited to business needs, which is why it may be a disincentive? Is that your question, or are you just talking on a fundamental level that the argument that smart contracts are objective in itself is a wrong argument?
Both, I would say that even from a business perspective. From a business perspective, it would be rigid, whereas from a philosophical standpoint, saying that their objective is also incorrect. Whichever one you would feel is more pertinent to address right now.
I mean, see, I'm happy to do both, right? So I'll take the latter one first because it's the shorter question to answer. Subjectivity enters into a context where there is the ability for both parties to have their own interpretations to a given predicament or a given clause or a given agreement, right? I mean, that's where subjectivity even enters into the question. Now, how do you reduce the subjectivity? You think of all the, like, you make an exhaustive list of the ways in which a particular agreement can pan out. That's something that you do. Another thing that you do is that you break everything down to numbers. You break everything down to particular standards that can be quantified, measured, and seen. And therefore, you remove this element of subjectivity. Like subjectivity would say to the best efforts of both parties. Now, what are the best efforts of both parties? Can you break that down into numbers? Sure. I mean, within 6 months of the contract executing, this much was done. Like, say, 1 quintal of rice was transferred from A to B. So the entire idea, as I said, like going back to the philosophy or the vision of smart contracts and blockchain, is that you want to remove this element of subjectivity. And when you take the help of numbers, when you take the help of yardsticks, parameters, I do believe that it becomes a very objective sort of parameter. Because if something has happened by that particular point of time, you've met that criteria, then you know that objectively this is happening. As opposed to which, of course, if there are some factors that are beyond your control, if there is a hailstorm or a force majeure or a pandemic, then of course we've spoken about how you can probably pause that contract, or you can have administrative controls built in. But short of that, I do think that smart contracts and blockchain generally allow for more objective execution of contracts, which is also where the phrase code is law comes from. because code is completely objective, right? I mean, you write a piece of code and execute in the exact manner in which you've finally written it. Whether you know or not how that will execute is another question, but the way in which the computer reads that particular code is how it will execute. There is no point at which the computer will come back and ask you, hey, I have a clarification. I think this should happen or that should happen. No, everything is in the code. So you break everything down into these syntaxes, right? If X then Y, with multiple X's, multiple Y's where possible. And that is how objectivity comes in. We don't want any situation for interpretation or going back to argumentation. Concrete numbers, cold numbers. If this happens by this time, then you're not in breach of contract. If this does not happen by this time, you are in breach of contract. So that's my argument on why I believe smart contracts are more objective than general contracts, traditional contracts. And I'm very sorry, I've forgotten your first question. Could you just take me back there?
With because of this subjective element in that, the smart contract will reflect the person who has coded it.
I'm sorry, I lost you. Could you just repeat the last line of your question again?
Essentially, it's to do with how code reflects the intent of the person who has coded it, because every code has an end objective, right?
No, every code does have an end objective. Surely, it will reflect the intent of the person who has coded it. Sure, but what is that intent? Right? Is the way that it's been written down? Does it have any scope for subjectivity? That is the question, right? And when you talk about intent of that person, the intent of that person could be to build a very objective contract when certain things happen, right? In which case, then it becomes like a fairly objective sort of contract. So if you could probably come up with an example to show where, despite using cold hard numbers, there is this element of subjectivity that is brought in, probably I'll be able to answer your question more directly. But at this point, I'll probably just differ with you on that question. The intent of the parties is embodied in a piece of contract, which by its very nature cannot be subjective. It has to be objective. It will fire in certain ways when certain things happen. And that's about, I mean, you use Facebook, right? Let's take that example. You use Facebook. Has it ever happened that you go ahead and you like a post and suddenly you're taken to Facebook Messenger and the messenger calls that particular person? No, because it's been coded in a way that when you like a particular post, it will remain to be a like on that particular post. That's about it. If X happens, Y happens. That's the idea of code, which is why code is so desirable, right? Because there is no element of subjectivity. I think the earlier question that you had asked was, how does this sit well with the incentives of business people to enter, because it's a rigid system. Again, going back to Muskan's question, I did touch upon this earlier as well, that there are a lot of technological innovations to ensure that you can bring in some mutability, some flexibility into smart contracts. And again, all of these solutions will be technological solutions. You will have possible contracts, you will have patching, you will have private chain overwriting, you will have what have you, administrative controls. You will have languages of blockchain writing that allow for mutable variables. All of these things. You will have transaction sets, active sets, passive sets. So all of these things will allow for some sort of mutability, and that is what will make a smart contract based contract or a traditional contract which includes some bits of smart contracts more attractive to business people. That's where I stand on this side.
Sure, sir. We can, I think, proceed with the discussion.
All right. So if all right, so let's just take it into nuance. We have another half an hour, so I thought that we probably should not do this, but I don't see any harm as well. So let's think about what are the ways in which, because ultimately, if you want to make a smart contract enforceable, you need to make it a contract. If you need to make it a contract, what are the elements of a contract, right? You have offer, acceptance, and consideration. And you will say that, all right, now how do I architect or how do I design a traditional contract or a recording contract that has smart contract code embedded within it to display these features of a smart contract? So even where an offer is concerned, right? Let's just restrict ourselves to the discussion on the offer within a recording contract that contains a smart contract code. how can that offer be made? That offer can be made in multiple ways. One is that you just float that particular piece, you float that recording contract on the blockchain, where every singular person on that blockchain is able to see that recording contract, is able to pass through the contents of that recording contract to understand what exactly this contract is about, and then take an informed decision as to whether they want to execute that contract or not. Now, this doesn't exactly become an offer; it becomes an invitation to offer. Parabolic smoke ball, right? I mean, you have an advertisement. Someone will come to you, someone will give you an offer, and you accept it. But this, like, jurisprudence from traditional contractual law will also apply to smart contracts to a large extent. So that recording contract can be floated on the entire blockchain. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is that you have identified the person with whom you want to enter into this contract, in which case you will send that recording contract only to that one particular person. That one person will see it, think about it, probably not execute it. And there can be a third version as well, right, where you probably don't have any or you don't want to include any subjective elements at all. So you don't need the recording contract to begin with. You probably only need the smart contract code to execute when a particular condition is met, in which case you can send that piece of code as a packet of information on that blockchain to another participant on that blockchain, right? In which case the other participant will see and understand what this particular piece of code is going to do, and that person can then on his or her end execute that contract through a plugin on a blockchain. Now, a plugin, of course, is maybe an alien term. A plugin essentially is nothing. Think of it as an adapter that will help you execute a piece of code on that blockchain, because you also need, like, that the piece of code needs to be executed by someone. Ultimately, it's just lines of text. If you don't execute it, nothing will come of it. So the person who receives that piece of code can then it, and that becomes his acceptance of that offer. That you have given, you sent this piece of code to me, that was offer, and now I have executed it at my end, and this becomes my acceptance. But yeah, these are the multiple ways in which offers can be made, at least in the context of smart contracts. And one example that I would like to touch upon here is that of Open Bazaar. Again, is something of a very similar nature. And think of it like an Amazon, except on blockchain, right? So someone, or an eBay on blockchain, that's actually a better example. So someone will come forth and say, I want to sell these shoes or these books, and that particular advertisement will be displayed to all users of eBay, or at least will be accessible to all users of eBay, who can then go ahead and say, all right, whether I want to buy it or whether I want to make an offer for it or not. Some people will make offers for some amount of money, for X amount of money. Some people will make offers for X plus one amount of money. Some people will make offers for X minus one amount of money. So in that case, that becomes the offer. Open Bazaar runs on a very similar concept. The person is able to either offer for sale a good or a software or any other service, right? And in that case, that a description of whatever is being sold is presented to everyone on Open Bazaar. Any particular person can then go back to the offerer and say, this is what I'm willing to pay for this. I want to use this product or service. This is what I'm willing to pay for this. And is that acceptable to you? In which case, again, the person who has made the offer has the ability to say, yes, I want to go ahead with this contract or not. So that is the bit of, this is where I'll restrict myself on the offer. Now, going to the acceptance, there are multiple ways of signifying your acceptance within the larger umbrella of a smart contract enabled recording contract as well. What that can take multiple forms. Of course, you will have to authenticate that particular contract in some way, or you will have to take an action to show that you accept the terms of that contract. Now, in terms of authentication, this can of course mean you can have a blockchain generated signature that you use in that particular contract, and you say, all right, I'm all happy for this contract to be executed. In which case, the person who had floated the contract to you in the first place will go ahead and execute those pieces of smart contract code on that blockchain. Or it can be something to the effect of transfer X amount of money into this escrow account. As soon as you've done that, you have signified your acceptance to the contract. And yeah, so you have accepted the contract once again. So, I mean, all of these solutions will primarily be architectural. How do you, in all of the ways in which a contract can be offered or accepted in terms of, or in the universe of traditional contracts, these very same options are available with slight tweaking in the universe of smart contracts as well. So that's how that is done. Any questions at this point? Otherwise, I would like to touch upon probably signatures, digital signatures, e-signatures at this point, and legislations, which is something that I did not think we would go into, but I'm happy to talk, touch upon that briefly as well.
I don't think we have received any question on this specific point of offer
Sure.
and acceptance.
Sure. So let's just zoom out again. I mean, let's talk about what countries are doing to enable smart contract based contracts and blockchain technology generally, right? Now you need to understand that on top of it, from a zoomed out perspective, you will look at a blockchain in the form of a ledger. It is only a storage mechanism. It does not execute in and of itself unless you run some sort of code on the blockchain, which is of which smart contract codes are one example. But at least within the Indian context, today there is a lot of ambiguity around whether signatures developed on a blockchain network will be considered as electronic signatures or digital signatures within the Indian Contract Act or within the Information Technology Act. Now, what a lot of countries or a lot of states, at least in the US, have done is that they have gone ahead and they have amended their own laws to clarify that any signature that is built on a blockchain or any signature that is generated on a blockchain is acceptable within law. Now, in India, there is very little clarity on whether signatures that are developed on a blockchain will qualify as legitimate e-signatures or digital signatures. But like in terms of our policy recommendations to the government, this is something that has come up time and again, that we really need to go ahead and change bits and pieces of the IT Act and bits and pieces of the Contract Act to ensure that there is a clear acceptability for contracts that are executed using blockchain technology or ancillary technologies that come associated with blockchain technology. So that has definitely been a point of contention generally as well, in terms of just whether we want to go ahead and do that. Because in India, if you see the mood of the government, really, while they're all for blockchain, they're quite against cryptos, right? And I'll take you guys back to the 2018 circular of the RBI, which said that any bank which is facilitating trading in cryptocurrencies or handling cryptocurrencies in any way is now directed to freeze the accounts of those people who are doing such trading or such holding or such handling. Now, on the 4th of March of this year, that was overturned, and we've seen a lot of business generally come in with relations to cryptocurrencies and cryptocurrency exchanges. But I think one bit of the conversation that not a lot of people are having is that you will not be able to execute smart contracts. You will not be able to use the full ability of blockchain related technologies as long as you don't have cryptocurrencies. Because think about this. Ultimately, a smart contract will be able to transfer the ownership of goods or services, so on and so forth, which exist in the real world, right? We are not creating a separate set of products or goods or services that will be handleable only through smart contracts. The ultimate goal is that all contracts become automated, all contracts become self-executing, in which case probably tomorrow my idea would be that I want to sell off a house, right? And I don't want to enter into a traditional contract for that. I want to enter into a smart contract because probably I want to securitize my house. I want to break it down into 100 pieces, sell it to 100 people so that I get a little more money. In that case, you can't really do that unless either A, you have some sort of an integration between your banks and blockchain systems and your wallet switches, or you just have escrow accounts which can support cryptocurrency. So the point that I'm trying to make is a lot of the transactions which can happen on blockchain or through smart contracts can only happen if you have cryptocurrencies enabling them. You cannot have money passing from bank A to bank B using a smart contract. That's because a smart contract is restricted to that particular blockchain. It does not really connect a bank to a bank. It connects two members on the blockchain. So yeah, that is that. Soumya, I don't see a lot of questions, but if you would probably want me to flesh out any bit of the conversation that we've had up until now, because I do feel that there's a gap just in terms of understanding the basics, which is why these questions have also stopped probably. And there's also a lot to unpack in one session. I mean, I'll completely give you guys that. So if there are any other even fundamental questions going back to like what is a blockchain, what's a consensus mechanism, what is the Byzantine generals problem, I'm happy to take those up, because I don't really see the point of going forward if what we've discussed up until now is not very clear to most participants.
Right, sir. So there is one question from Dhanshri. We can take that. Can we unmute Dhanshri?
Sure, please go ahead.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
you are.
So my question is, when it comes to adjudicating disputes regarding the smart contracts, how will the governing law and venue be decided, given when the contract is, say, ranging in different jurisdictions?
All right. Fairly simple. Just the way that it happens in traditional contracts, right? As I said, smart contracts in and of themselves cannot ensure that the jurisdiction of dispute resolution for a particular dispute is X or Y. You will need to have non-executing clauses as part of that transaction as well, which will be embedded in the recording contract that we just spoke about, or even a traditional contract, right? So that bit will remain within the universe of traditional contracts, where both parties agree that all right, this will be the venue of, or this will even be the method. I mean, you may not want to go to court, or you may want to surrender your right to go to court. You may want to limit yourselves to an arbitration. All of those things will have to be listed within that recording contract, and which of course both parties will have recourse to, will be able to understand in clearly humanly readable language to take an informed decision as to whether they want to enter this contract or execute this contract or not. Um I think there's a bit of a gap in understanding smart contract enforceability is not an umbrella or a framework in itself. Smart contract enforceability is a very different problem. The problem is, how do you make smart contracts, which are a completely new animal, understandable to judges? How do you make this understandable to lawyers? And how do you make this understandable to people? The law is not changing. The law is what it was for traditional contracts, and the longest time that is how it will remain, right? Unless, of course, taking your very example, if I have one party in Switzerland, the other party in Germany, probably 50 years from now, we will have some technological advancements again, which will allow me to write a piece of code which says, if I raise a dispute, then this contract with the records of all monies and goods transferred from Switzerland to Germany should be sent to party A, adjudicator A, seated out of France, right? In which case, as soon as I raise a dispute, all of these records go there, and that in law is recognized to be the settled position of how venue will be decided. Of course, those conversations are not being had right now because we're at a very nascent stage. Right now, if I were to say I want to break down even jurisdiction of dispute resolution into if X then Y, then I can definitely go ahead and do that. The only problem is no country is going to accept it. No law is going to accept it, and which is why this is going to be a very, very slow moving process. But for now, what we do know, the immediate step is that you leverage the courts of law, which have been adjudicating on questions of traditional contracts for so many years, to also adjudicate questions of smart contracts. And going forward, that will be minimized because you will have what is known as decentralized dispute resolution, which is a complete animal altogether. We can have another conversation on that. But the idea would be that you stop sending these disputes to courts, which are not competent to handle most code-related problems. They will have to they will have to call upon an expert who will then go through the lines of code and say, all right, this is how it was meant to execute, but it didn't execute in this way, or probably the code is written incorrectly. That will be very hassle. The solution to that will be that these recording contracts and the pieces of smart contract code go to decentralized parties globally who will then have, who will then pass through this contract to understand, all right, this is what this contract was supposed to do. This is what the minds of the people, this is what they had agreed upon. And whether this is in fact a piece of code that has actually been written very smartly and is completely legal, or is it a piece of code which has misfired, in which case it becomes a mistake of fact, and you say, all right, return him his money because this piece of code was not supposed to execute in this manner. So yeah, I think we need to shift in our own minds the frameworks that we are operating within when we hear the word smart contract enforceability. Till the time you guys are 60, you will probably not see a lot of movement on making every single bit of every single contract completely automated. It will not happen that soon. But for now, we are trying to leverage the best bits of blockchain technology and what it has to offer to us. We're trying to slowly integrate it into business. We're trying to slowly integrate it into courtrooms, so that some of the disputes that some very obvious disputes that we go through, right? I mean, some party says, I will not pay you this money. What are you going to do? Those problems are resolved by the element of automaticity, where you have two escrow accounts, you have cryptocurrencies in account A, account B. As soon as this happens, money is directly transferred from point A to point B. I don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. No one has to worry about it. The blockchain will do it. The smart contract will do it. And a lot of really big companies are coming through with their own solutions to execute this. And going forward, hopefully, we'll just have one large set of standard term contractual clauses, right, which have been tested time and again to make sure that at least they don't misfire, so that bit of uncertainty is taken out. This will ultimately have to be one massive library of written pieces of code that execute in a certain way, which people will be able to then pick and place, right? So if you want to make a contract, you will not have to go to a lawyer. You want to sell your house, you won't have to go to a lawyer. You will probably just go to that centralized library. It will probably be a public government library. It can even be a private library. You go and you say, you will click on a button that says, sale and purchase. You'll go there, sale and purchase of a house. You go there. It will give you some standard template clauses, and you will be able to build your own contract within a couple of hours, right? And you will send it out, and you know that you don't need a lawyer. You know that you don't need a court, because these have been tested time and again, and these will be executed through code with very little to no human interaction, with very little to no human intervention, and therefore there is no likelihood of this going wrong. So that's my answer. And on a lighter note, a lot of you might be thinking that doesn't this make us obsolete? Well, yes. As lawyers, unfortunately, we're already being made obsolete in some fields. And going forward, technology is likely to be a larger player within the legal field generally, within the legal fraternity generally, which is why we will also have to learn to remake ourselves. We will also have to learn to probably pick up new skills. As a tech lawyer, for instance, I'm just speaking from my personal experience. As a tech lawyer, my work today is a lot more about understanding technology than it is to understand. I mean, of course, I need to understand the law, but I can understand that easily. It's human readable text. But I really need to understand how an ATM works, and how there are 15 softwares offered by 15 different parties which come together in the functioning of this ATM. So for a lot of you guys who are interested in tech law, probably it won't be a bad idea if you were to pick up a course in coding to generally just understand how coding works, because a lot of what I'm saying right now may feel alien to you, because, and it did to me at some point as well, right? I mean, my bosses would speak about this and I had absolutely no idea what was happening. But if you were to just acclimatize yourself to the way tech works, that would give you a competitive advantage that not a lot of lawyers have or are even willing to take, right? A lot of lawyers globally today are pretty much happy with what they're doing, and they are oblivious to the fact that there will, sooner than later, there'll be a lot of changes in the industry as to how contracts are drafted, how they're executed, so on and so forth. So for anyone who's really interested in picking up tech law, I think it was on EDX. Harvard has a really good course on how technology and law interact. Pick up probably a very top level course on coding to understand how coding works. Understand and just cultivate the habit of digging deep into terms that you don't understand, right? If you were to talk about consensus mechanisms, I like for the first few weeks, probably I was making mistakes understanding exactly what is the Byzantine general's problem. How is it solved through proof of stake, and how is it solved through let's say DPoS, right, or something of that sort. I mean, there are multiple consensus mechanisms. So how is it solved in all of these consensus mechanisms? But you need to know all of that so that you are able to apply the law which is still being made for those older, like not traditional sets of businesses and traditional issues to apply to this law. Yeah, so I think on that I'll literally stop here, and I think we'll have time for one more question. If there is no question at all, I can probably just give you some insights into the resources that you can look at and what steps you can take at this stage as students to probably become better versed with tech laws, and what are the emerging fields of tech laws for you guys to be interested in right now, because these will be pretty much these will dominate the market over the course of the next 5 to 10 years at least.
So we have quite a few questions.
Okay. Now everyone's awake. When there are 8 minutes left, everyone's awake, right? Oh, great. Go ahead, Soumya.
Okay, so there's a comment. So there's a question by Muskan Agarwal again. She says on the earlier point you made, in case of companies who issue ICO and have these tokens styled as utility tokens and provide smart contracts to their customers, users to utilize their services, in such cases, can these smart contracts be said not to involve use of cryptocurrencies but crypto tokens? It's more on
Got it. So, okay, here's what you need to understand. Cryptocurrencies, crypto tokens are not two different things. This is essentially a piece of software that is released from a blockchain to reward the person who is keeping that blockchain alive. Now, that person may keep the blockchain alive by just being the administrator, or by investing time, effort, money, blood, and sweat into servers or computing power to keep that particular blockchain alive. So, for instance, with Bitcoin, you need to have you need to undertake mining, and you can't undertake mining, at least today, unless you have invested immensely in computing power. So the reward for that person is the cryptocurrency that you're talking about, right? Now that cryptocurrency, of course, I think Anjali has a question. I wasn't able to read it, but I'll definitely come to it. Now that cryptocurrency, whether you call it a utility token, whether you call it a security, whether you call it an asset, whether you call it a software, a good, or a capital asset, anything, that is a policy choice. That is a policy choice. Why? Because there are different sets of laws which apply to different categories of to these very different categories, right? So the SEC, which is the Securities and Exchanges Commission of the United States, published a fairly long paper on when a given cryptocurrency, or when a given, like when you can call it a token. Okay, so anything that offers utility is a token. Anything that is closer to a money is cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin that you use to pay for bread, or Ether that you use to pay for bread, is closer to currency, because you can pay for things with it, as opposed to a utility token, which is something that allows you to do something exclusively within that particular app. So we were working for this one client who wanted to issue tokens that would allow the holders of these tokens to participate in certain surveys. Now, you can't use those tokens to go and buy bread. So it's not a currency. It's just a utility token, because it allows you to do certain things on that platform. But why is it that that particular company said, I don't want this to be a cryptocurrency. I only want this to be a token, or a crypto token, as Muskan said. Because different sets of laws apply to goods and to money. If it is money, then you are regulated, at least in India, by the RBI. If you qualify that as a security, which is security token offerings, as I said, if I want to sell my house and tomorrow I want to securitize my house, want to break it down into 1,000 pieces and sell it to 1,000 different people, then securities laws will apply to me. Why? Because I am selling my house through these tokens, through and like these tokens then ultimately become securities. These become tradable securities, the values of which will fluctuate to no end. These will become like your shares and your stocks on stock markets. Therefore, SEBI laws will apply. As opposed to which, if I simply say it's a good, then a fairly smaller set of laws will apply to me, and I don't need to undertake SEBI compliances in India. I can't offer a currency in India in any case. I mean, the RBI will go ahead and do that. But that is the only reason why most of the companies that you will see today, at least in India, who are offering who are going ahead with ICOs and so on and so forth, will model their products as utility tokens, and they will, like, we have had people coming into us with their white papers to saying, how do I make sure what I'm offering is not understood as a security, is not understood as being an alternate currency, but is only understood as being a utility token. It's that important for them. Otherwise, they once you start complying with SEBI laws, you are pretty much done for. Similar with like you don't want to be regulated as an entity, right? You want to be able to do your business freely and you want to be able to do it well. So that is the only distinction. Otherwise, these are pieces of software that denote exactly the same thing. They're made exactly the same way. Crypto tokens, cryptocurrencies are not separate things. They're the same things. They're just how you model them because you don't want to comply with certain laws because it's too much friction for your business. So I hope that answers your question, Muskan. If not, if you want to take this forward, I'm happy to take it offline. Soumya, I think Anjali had a question, which I was not able to see really fully.
So she has asked what all can go wrong with smart contracts.
What all can go, dude? Pretty much everything can go wrong with smart contracts, right? Because think about it this way. As I think Jubal spoke about, a smart contract is not necessary. You can execute a smart contract if you're part of certain blockchains, right? So you go onto GitHub, you probably familiarize yourself with how blockchains work. You start partaking in a particular blockchain network, and you say, I want to execute a smart contract with person A, person B. You have a wallet. A wallet again is a piece of software. It's like your Paytm except for cryptocurrency. So you can have a soft wallet, you can have a cold wallet, which is a hardware wallet, which is your pen drive, or you can have a hot wallet, which is a software wallet. It's on your laptop. It's on the server. So you say, okay, I will attach my my wallet to this blockchain network, and the other party does it as well. The other party, and you probably don't know what crypto is right now. You probably don't know how smart contracts work. You don't know how safe this entire ecosystem is. You are just enthusiastic about it, so you want to probably dip your toe in. You go ahead, you're sent a piece of code, and someone probably just says, all right, just click on this button, and you will probably get two more bitcoins, and you're really happy. So you click that piece of code, except that it's a completely separate piece of code, right? Because you, being a layperson or you being a lawyer, you cannot read code. So you click on that, and as a result of that, your entire wallet is emptied. All of the money, all of the cryptocurrency from your wallet goes to the other person. Now that is one massive kind of error that can happen. The other simply is you enter into contracts with people, and I'm not even talking about like smart contracts that are meant to be enforceable in courts. I'm talking about simple smart contract code, simply as pieces of code that are executed over blockchain networks. Or you probably, as a second example, you probably get into a transaction with someone who's a minor, and he's probably sent you something, or has probably been able to take away something from your wallet, and you want legal recourse against that person. Not only is your problem now that you have not executed a contract with that person, and therefore that piece of code is not enforceable in court, but even if, for the sake of argument, you were to get beyond that article, then that person is probably 13, right? You can't really proceed against that person. Those problems happen. What else can go wrong with smart contracts? The problem that courts, for one, and lawyers also, for one, are really, really concerned about is that even expert coders cannot be 100% sure that their code will run in a particular way, right? So they feel that, all right, I've written this piece of code and I've done it. I've done this a million times. I'm pretty sure this is how this will execute, but it can execute in absolutely any way. As an example, take Y2K, right? Year 2020. Just that entire problem was just this, right? I mean, people thought that the way it was those lines of code were written with the best of intentions by the coders. They said, all right, now we're getting into year 2000, so it'll keep on going. Except it would have taken us much earlier in time, just in terms of those records, and all the records between that earlier time and the year 2000 would have been wiped out, and that became now a problem, right? How do you solve for this? So you can't really be sure as to how a piece of code will execute, even if you're the most experienced person of the lot. So just how code will execute becomes another problem. And as I said, the solution to this would be probably one massive government-backed or like a multinational-backed library of pieces of code which have been tried and tested over and over again to make sure that these errors don't crop up, that you will then be able to use. Up until then, of course, these problems will keep on happening. And as Jewel rightly pointed out, when you take this to court, the court might very well hold that, all right, boss, I mean, this money needs to come back, but that money is already going from person A to person B, and short of seizing assets or directing that person to send that money back, in which case like not a lot of people may be willing to comply, then short of seizing that person's assets and sending this money back by force, there is very little that a court of law can do, because that money is already transferred. But one solution going forward that the Indian government is very seriously considering, that will put an end to all of these problems to some extent, is that of centrally backed digital currencies, because these will be currencies which will be offered by the government. They will be government backed and completely legal tender. They will be like your rupee notes or your rupee coins and your 10 rupee notes and your 500 rupee notes, except these will be programmable currencies, in which case you will be able to see exactly where, and these will, mind you, these will be pieces of software again, just like cryptocurrencies, right? uh, the the government will then be able to trace exactly where this particular piece of software has gone, to whom and when. And if these sorts of problems were to arise, then they will be able to reverse certain transactions. So the idea for the government generally, and again, I'm speaking on a policy level here, the idea for the government is that you want more security in terms of transactions, you want to reduce money laundering, and to some extent you just want to, I mean, they don't say it, but this is going to be a veritable problem, is that the government will have a lot of insight into how you're spending your money. Of course, they'll be able to do a lot with that information, just in terms of how they want to build monetary policy in the country. But it also impinges on your privacy, because you shouldn't have to tell the government where you're spending your money. You don't need to do that. And that's not a problem today with notes, right? I mean, you can take a 500 rupee note, spend it anywhere within India. The government does not necessarily know, at least by that one piece of note, where you've spent it and who has spent it and on what. But with CBDCs, that may be changing soon, because the government will have that information, which is one of the largest points of resistance against CBDCs as well. So a lot of the conversation that we are having is tending into policy. And had I known that this would be a more relatable sort of topic for all of you, I would have done that much earlier. But Soumya, let's just take one last question and then close.
Sure, sir. We have one question from Aditya Vyas. He asked, in case blockchain is being used for conducting elections and smart contracts are used vis-a-vis voters, do hashes completely disrupt the trust and immutability of blockchain, security of votes or manipulation?
Got it. Got it. No, absolutely. It's actually the absolute opposite, right? Even with chameleon hashes, I have been able to explain this properly to you. Chameleon hashes don't allow for you to change the content on a blockchain, but that change itself is traceable. It leaves a marker to show that there was some other information here earlier, and that information has been changed. So if and also understand who will execute, who is able to run a chameleon hash function on a blockchain. It will only be the Election Commission of India, because it would be the Election Commission of India that would be administering the blockchain that will record all of these votes. It's not like the BJP will be administering this. It's not like the Congress will be administering this, or the Aam Aadmi Party will be administering this. It would be the Election Commission of India. And unless you buy probably all of the Election Commission of India, you can't get away with this, because every time you try to use a chameleon hash to change the contents of the votes that have been casted, there will be what is called a scar, quote unquote. That's the term that's used. A scar will be there to show that there has been a change in this entry since it was made. This is not the original entry. And another point that really helps with this issue as well is that this is ultimately a means and a method of storage, right? It's an immutable, undestroyable to an extent, because it's decentralized architecturally, means of storage. So if the courts were tomorrow to say, I want to see that entire set of votes that have been casted on the blockchain, then they will very easily be able to see that these votes have been changed or these votes have been tampered with. So the Election Commission, again, has no incentive to go ahead and shoot itself in the foot. So in my opinion, at least in terms of voting, if you keep aside the logistical problems, of course, blockchain-based voting can do a lot for safer voting, more accurate voting in the country. Of course, booth capturing and all are things that the blockchain can't solve for, right? If people are standing next to you with a gun at your head, you will press whatever button they want you to press. But certain other problems will be solved by blockchain-based voting.
you, sir. That was a very interesting point. Is there right?
I was just saying I wanted to see all of the other questions. For some reason, I can't see those questions. All right.
I
What
think
all
so.
can go wrong in case of?
Sorry, we have covered most of the questions. You can check.
Got it. Got it. Got it.
Is there any other point which you want to discuss?
At this point, yeah, I think I'll just make my closing remarks. I'm very sorry, guys, if it like at some point this entire thing became too technical. And because usually, and at least for me, I've always preferred a more Socratic method of discussion with participants where I don't speak. I usually just ask questions, and the answers from the participants then are able to lead into more questions, right? We did this at Bhopal as well, NLIU Bhopal, pretty fun there. So of course, with in this sort of scenario, we can't do that. But I'm extremely sorry if this became too technical or too boring at some point. But please feel free to reach out to me offline. Happy to connect over LinkedIn to take this conversation forward, not in relation to blockchain, but even in relation to fintech, in relation to data. At Ikigai Law, we do all sorts of work, and it's pretty interesting work, right? So some of you who are interested in online gaming, do follow us on our Instagram page. Follow me, follow the firm, one way or the other. And there's just a lot happening. And the last idea that I would like to leave you guys with is that there aren't a lot of lawyers who are entering this field. This is not a saturated field as yet. And for those of you who are interested in probably making a career abroad in the longer run, this is also a field that helps a lot in that endeavor. Why? Because it's the same skill set that keeps getting transferred from one country to the other, right? I mean, the technology remains the same. When it comes to data related laws, at least there is a lot of overlap between what is happening in India, what is happening abroad. When it comes to payment system laws, India is the leader. Trust me when I say this. India is the leader in payment system, at least payment system related technology, and then the accompanying laws. And the world is looking to us for implementing UPI in their countries. The US wants to implement UPI now, and Singapore wants to implement UPI now. So there's a lot of work happening in technology in India generally. And depending on what your incentives are or what your motivations are of becoming a lawyer, I would sincerely urge you to consider this as a field of law that you would like to practice, because we can always use more talent in the field. Not a lot of people today look at TMT as something that they'd like to pursue. People are interested in GC, which is great. As a lawyer, you should be well-rounded. But for people who are interested in specificities, for people who are interested in having expertise in very niche areas, I think technology is the way to go forward. And this is going to boom in the coming years. So that definitely helps, right? That's about it, Soumya. I think I'm good. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your advice, sir. Thank you for taking out your precious time for this insightful discussion. And we hope that you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did.
Absolutely did. Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope that I was able to add some, if not a lot of value, at least today. And yeah, please, everyone, all attendees, let's keep in touch, and always happy to help you guys out and guide you going forward. It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We would like to hope had an enriching session about your experience about today's session. Please fill out the feedback form that has been shared with you in the chat box. We would also like to thank SCC Online and EBC and all partners for the event. Please follow us on social media, on our social media platforms for more updates about our events and initiatives. Thank you, sir, once again for joining us today. Still then, all of you, please stay safe. Have a good day.